my inner being was like, there's nothing wrong with this, especially if I look cuter than any girl does. Like, what's the problem?
Magic Johnson's son, I think it's E-Day, right? Was in the news and said, I only date straight men. If a man is dating you, respectfully, they are not straight, okay? They are not straight.
But even I told them on my birthday in June that I was like, we're not doing he, we're not doing man, we're not doing gay. Like, and it was very freeing. The girls in the room are not doing it. Like, they don't look cute. They're not dressed to any nines. So
at first glance, it sounded like just another celebrity soundbite, the kind that flickers across timelines and disappears by morning. But this one lingered. When E.J. Johnson began explaining how they navigate identity and attraction, the room didn't erupt, it tightened. There was a strange stillness, like everyone sensed the line had just been crossed, even if no one could quite agree where. Because the more E.J. clarified, the more the picture seemed to blur, embracing she, they pronouns while rejecting the label of woman, presenting them ways many read as feminine, yet insisting on being understood differently.
But even I told them on my birthday in June that I was like, we're not doing he, we're not doing man, we're not doing gay. Like, and it was very freeing, you know, even like son. I was like, you know, the world tried to give me that label, like Magic Johnson's son. And I was like, well, he's dead. And now there is Miss Thing. Like, we're not doing that either.
And right there, in that tension, a bigger question quietly formed, not just about identity, but about perception. Then came the claim that shifted everything into overdrive. The idea that the men in E.J.'s orbit are completely straight didn't just raise eyebrows, it challenged something deeper, something people thought they already understood. That moment didn't explode instantly, it simmered, spreading through conversations and comment sections like a quiet ripple gaining force.
And I don't attract gay men, and I'm not attracted to gay men. Like, it's just not a thing. That's why I don't go to gay clubs. I don't go to, you know, gay things, because it's like the men that I attract are not there.
And just when it felt like the discussion might settle, another layer surfaced, a statement about outshining every woman in any room. Suddenly, this wasn't just about labels anymore. It felt personal, because underneath all of it, there was an unspoken tension. Are people reacting to E.J.'s words, or to what those words seem to challenge about how attraction and identity is supposed to work? And maybe that's why this didn't fade away like everything else, because the more you try to pin it down, the less certain it becomes. What started as a confusing explanation suddenly began to feel like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite lock into place, and people couldn't stop trying to make it make sense.
When I was a kid and like they were like, well, you can't wear skirts, and I was like, well, why not? You know, it's like my inner being was like, there's nothing wrong with this, especially if I look cuter than any girl does. Like, what's the problem? Like, what's the issue? And that's exactly how I apply it to myself to these days in the way that I present, like in my, you know, in my feminine regalia. You know, I've always been a feminine being, and like that's just like how I best express myself. But I'm like, listen, I'm out all the time, you know, and like I'm killing a dress and no one else is. Like, the girls in the room are not doing it. Like, they don't look cute. They're not dressed to any nines. So
when E.J. added that the men they date have typically spent most of their lives with women, it didn't clarify things, it deepened the mystery. Because now the situation wasn't just unconventional, it felt layered in a way that made people pause mid-thought. If these men historically pursued women, what exactly changes in this dynamic? And why does that distinction matter so much here?
I don't attract gay men, and I'm not attracted to gay men. But no, but to be honest, it's like, that's why I don't go to gay clubs. I don't go to, you know, gay things, because it's like the men that I attract are not there. I do that when I go to the straight rooms.
So, so has it always been that way for you in terms of when it comes to men? Has it always been what some people consider the straight guy always being the one that would approach you?
Or somebody who, has been intimate and dating, you know, women for most of their life, or like up until then, for sure. Absolutely. It has always been that way, but now it's like even more so now that I definitely present in more of a feminine way, because also like it's like my energy is that.
As the conversation spread, social media didn't react with subtlety, it reacted with intensity. Threads filled up fast, not just with opinions, but with people trying to decode what they were hearing, almost like they were working through a logic problem in real time. Some responses came off blunt, others more reflective, but they all circled the same underlying tension. Can someone redefine labels for themselves while still relying on those same labels when choosing partners? That contradiction didn't just stand out, it became the center of attention. And then there was the deeper question nobody could quite ignore. If labels truly don't matter, why draw such a specific boundary around who qualifies as a partner? It's the kind of detail that seems small at first, but the more you sit with it, the more it starts to feel like the key to everything. Because this wasn't just about identity anymore. It was about consistency, intention, and what people choose to prioritize when no one's really sure what the rules are. By the time the discussion reached a wider audience, it had already evolved into something bigger than EJ's original comments. It became a kind of social mirror, reflecting how differently people interpret the same situation and how quickly certainty can fall apart when the lines aren't clearly defined. And just as the noise was reaching its peak, another voice entered the conversation, one that wasn't known for staying quiet. The moment 50 Cent finally stepped into the conversation, the tone didn't just shift, it hardened.
50 is facing some backlash apparently for saying that men who date transgender women are batiman. I mean, he's technically not incorrect.
His words landed without hesitation, almost like a verdict rather than an opinion, and that's what made people stop scrolling. He didn't dance around it or soften the edges. Instead, he framed it in the simplest terms possible, as if complexity itself was the problem. And when the backlash came rushing in, he didn't retreat. He leaned in further, reinforcing his stance with even more certainty. But what made his response more layered, more difficult to dismiss outright, was when he pointed to his own past, mentioning his mother's identity in a way that seemed to signal, at least from his perspective, that his viewpoint wasn't rooted in hostility, but in something he believed was clarity. And that's where everything began to feel even more tangled. Because now, this wasn't just EJ's perspective under the spotlight. It was a direct clash between two completely different ways of defining reality. On one side, EJ's fluid explanation of identity and attraction. On the other, 50's rigid, almost mathematical framing of it. And somewhere in between, the audience found themselves trying to reconcile two narratives that didn't just differ, they seemed to cancel each other out entirely. It created a kind of mental friction that kept people hooked, replaying the same question from different angles, hoping one version would finally make sense. But just when it seemed like the debate had reached its peak, another layer crept in, quieter but sharper. The contrast between rejecting the label of woman while confidently placing oneself above all women didn't just confuse people, it unsettled them. It introduced a tension that wasn't about definitions anymore, but about perception and contradiction. Because the more that idea sat with people, the more it started to feel less like confidence and more like something harder to pin down, something that didn't fully align with the rest of the narrative. And maybe that's what kept this from fading away. Not just the bold statements or the viral reactions, but that underlying sense that something wasn't fully adding up, like a story being told in pieces that don't quite form a complete picture. The kind of situation where every answer seems to open the door to another question, and no matter how long you look at it, the full truth stays just out of reach. And just when it feels like every angle has already been explored, another question quietly surfaces, one that shifts the entire perspective without announcing itself. Because beyond the headlines and viral clips, there's a deeper tension most people aren't saying out loud. What happens when identity becomes something deeply personal, but attraction still operates in a world where others interpret it differently? That gap between how someone defines themselves and how others perceive them might be where all of this friction is really coming from. And the more you think about it, the less this feels like a simple disagreement and more like two completely different languages being spoken at the same time. What makes it even more intriguing is how confidently each side holds its position, as if there's no room for overlap. On one end, there's a belief that identity is entirely self-determined, fluid, and evolving. On the other, there's a conviction that certain definitions are fixed, rooted in something that can't be reinterpreted. And when those two perspectives collide, it doesn't just create disagreement, It creates a kind of stalemate where neither side feels misunderstood, yet neither side feels heard. That's the paradox that keeps pulling people back into the conversation. But here's where it takes an unexpected turn. The more this debate unfolds, the less it seems to be about EJ or 50 at all, and more about the audience watching it happen. Because everyone interpreting this is bringing their own assumptions, their own definitions, their own lines that they believe shouldn't be crossed. And suddenly, what looked like a celebrity controversy starts to feel like something much closer to home, forcing people to question not just who's right, but why they believe what they believe in the first place. And maybe that's the part no one can quite resolve. Not the statements, not the reactions, but the quiet realization that this conversation doesn't have a clean ending. Because the more it unfolds, the more it reveals something uncomfortable, that clarity in situations like this might not exist at all, only perspective. And just when you think the conversation couldn't get any more layered, it suddenly shifts from identity and attraction into something far more personal, privilege. Because behind all the headlines and reactions, there's another detail quietly shaping how people interpret this entire situation. E.J. Johnson didn't come from obscurity or struggle. They were born into a legacy built by Magic Johnson, a name that carries weight far beyond basketball. A figure whose story began in harsh conditions, doing physically demanding work alongside his father, long before the spotlight ever found him. That contrast doesn't just sit in the background, it lingers, influencing how every word, every claim is received. And the more people look at that contrast, the harder it becomes to ignore. Because while Magic's journey is often framed as discipline, resilience, and relentless effort, EJ's public image feels almost like the opposite, a life already elevated, already secured. Television appearances, fashion moments, glimpses into a lifestyle most people will never touch. It paints a picture that feels curated rather than constructed. And that's where the tension quietly intensifies. Not necessarily because of what EJ has done, but because of what many feel hasn't been tested, challenged, or earned in the same way. But here's where the narrative takes a sharper turn. It's not just about opportunity, it's about awareness of that opportunity. Because when confidence crosses into comparison, especially bold ones involving entire groups of people, it shifts how that confidence is perceived. What might have sounded like self-expression starts to feel, to some, like something heavier, something less about identity and more about unchecked assurance. And whether that interpretation is fair or not, it's the one that's sticking in people's minds. Then you bring 50 Cent back into the frame, and suddenly the contrast becomes even striking. Another figure shaped by completely different circumstances, known for building success from the ground up, now speaking on someone whose path looked nothing like that. And maybe that's why his words hit with the weight they did, not just because of what he said, but because of where he's coming from. Two completely different life experiences colliding in one very public moment, each one carrying its own version of what feels real. And by the time you reach the end of it all, the situation doesn't feel resolved, it feels exposed, not neatly tied together, not clearly answered, but left open in a way that keeps people thinking long after the conversation ends. Because underneath everything, identity, attraction, privilege, success, there's a deeper question still echoing. Are people reacting to what was said or to what it represents? Comment below with what you think is really going on. Leave a like if this gave you chills, and subscribe plus turn on notifications if you want to see more Hollywood secrets.